Amidst the smoke and the roar that echoed like thunder, stood the Galactic Gladiator Arena. It was more than just a battleground. It was the pinnacle of intergalactic entertainment. Warriors from hundreds of planets converged, wagering their lives for glory, freedom, or simply the chance to survive. The stands overflowed with creatures of all forms, their cheers shaking the arena as bets were placed on the gladiators, most of whom wouldn't last a single round. This event promised something extraordinary, a mysterious warrior newly added to the roster, hailing from planet Earth, a name unfamiliar to almost everyone. The promoters skillfully hyped the event, exaggerating the notion that this human was a rare find, an enigma in a tournament dominated by genetically engineered giants. The majority of the audience presumed it to be a fleeting spectacle for amusement, a weakling from a backwater world thrown into the grinder for laughs. In the gladiators' waiting area, seasoned warriors exchanged bets. The consensus was that the newcomer wouldn't survive a minute. A hulking six-armed brute named Gruck grinned, amusedly eyeing his comrades. "I say we give him a good show before we crush him," he growled, mandibles clicking with relish. Others guffawed, nodding in agreement. To them, this was just another routine match. To the audience, it was entertainment. But no one, not even the most seasoned bookkeepers, anticipated what was about to unfold. When Cale Vance stepped into the arena, the entire stadium fell into a breathless silence. He was not what they expected. No bulging muscles, no glowing eyes, no mechanical enhancements. He stood at an average height, clad in simple combat gear, his demeanor relaxed. His deep brown eyes calmly scanned the stadium, as if he had witnessed even larger crowds before. The announcer's voice boomed, introducing the warrior from the enigmatic planet Earth, a fragile, underdeveloped species barely held together by its own planet's gravity. Mocking laughter rippled through the stands. Cale Vance remained silent, shrugging slightly. He was all too familiar with this. Underestimation, arrogance. It never ended well for his opponents. Across the arena, his adversaries emerged. Gruck, the six-armed behemoth, led the charge, flanked by a ferocious reptilian berserker and a towering cybernetic monstrosity. They moved with casual confidence, savoring the moment, certain of their imminent victory. The starting horn blared. The fight commenced. Gruck lunged first, all six fists aimed at Cale's head. The human remained motionless until the very last moment. With flawless precision, he sidestepped, seized one of Gruck's arms, and twisted sharply. A horrifying crack echoed through the arena as the brute's joint dislocated. The monstrous figure howled in agony. Cale pressed on. With lightning-fast motion, he spun, using Gruck's own momentum to flip him over. The alien creature crashed to the ground, momentarily stunned. The reptilian warrior surged next, claws extended menacingly. Cale ducked beneath the frantic slash, snatched a discarded blade from the sand, and in a single, decisive stroke, plunged the blade into the creature's exposed throat. Blood spurted as the reptilian collapsed, gurgling its last breaths. The cybernetic warrior hesitated. Cale met its glowing red eyes, tilting his head. "Still want to try?" he questioned. The machine still lunged. Cale advanced, evaded the heavy strike, then reached for the exposed wiring on its neck. A quick tug, a spark of electricity erupted, and the cybernetic warrior's body convulsed before crashing down. Silence. Thousands of spectators were frozen in disbelief. 3 seasoned warriors had fallen in less than a minute. Cale exhaled, dusting off his hands as if he had just finished a light workout. Then, the crowd erupted. Inside the gladiators' barracks, the others were still reeling from what they had just witnessed. Cale sat on a bench, casually wiping blood from his blade. Gruck, now with his arm hastily bandaged, sat opposite him, eyes glued to Cale. The once arrogant brute had transitioned from a laughingstock to a stunned observer in mere moments. "What the hell are you?" Gruck finally muttered. Cale looked up, his expression neutral. "Just a regular guy." "Regular?" Another gladiator scoffed. "You took down Rare in one move. He's fought over 100 battles." Cale shrugged. He should have been more careful. Whispers spread throughout the room. Gladiators who had previously dismissed him as a joke were now reevaluating their stance. He wasn't the biggest, strongest, or fastest. But he was far more dangerous, efficient. A robotic attendant entered, projecting the latest fight statistics onto the wall. Cale Vance's name appeared. Moments later, his kill count updated. The entire system froze, confused. Murmurs of astonishment morphed into stunned silence as the screen flickered repeatedly, struggling to process the numbers. An engineer outside yelled, "System malfunction. It can't handle his stats." Cale merely raised an eyebrow. Then, whispers began. Who was this human? The moment the scoreboard froze, the atmosphere in the arena shifted. Spectators leaned forward, buzzing with speculation. The screen flickered again, numbers rapidly appearing and disappearing as the system wrestled to compute Cale Vance's kill count. Glitch, someone murmured in the stands. But those who had fought in the arena for years knew better. The scoreboard had never malfunctioned. It had recorded the achievements of the galaxy's most fearsome warriors, some with hundreds, even thousands of kills, yet it had never once failed to update. In the control room, engineers scrambled to assess the problem. A technician, with so many cybernetic implants he was barely organic, frantically ran diagnostics. His mechanical eye twitched as he crunched the numbers manually. "Sir," he called to his supervisor, voice trembling, "this isn't an error." The supervisor, a three-eyed reptilian, frowned. "Then what is it?" The technician gulped. "The system is rejecting Vance's kill count because it exceeds the maximum value we've ever programmed." The reptilian's three eyes blinked in unison. "How high is it?" The technician hesitated. "Thousands." Silence blanketed the control room. The supervisor stared at the screen, then at the human warrior calmly sitting in the barracks, seemingly oblivious to or unconcerned by the chaos he had unleashed. "By the gods," the supervisor muttered, "what the hell did we let into this arena?" In the barracks, Cale leaned back against the cold metal bench, arms crossed. He had noticed the unusual reaction from the arena staff, but he paid it little mind. Opposite him, Gruck sat with his one good arm resting on his knee, still watching Cale with an unreadable expression. Around them, other gladiators whispered, casting glances his way. Those who had mocked him earlier now seemed uncertain if they should even meet his gaze. Finally, an insectoid with razor-sharp mandibles spoke. "They're saying your kill count is broken," he said cautiously, "that the system can't even process the number." Cale shrugged. "Not my problem." The insectoid shifted uncomfortably. "How many have you killed?" The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. Cale exhaled, tilting his head slightly. "I stopped counting a long time ago." The way he said it, calm, emotionless, sent a chill through the room. Another gladiator, a reptilian with scarred scales, scoffed, "Impossible. No one has that many kills. Even the grand champion of the arenas has barely reached 500, and he's been fighting for over a century." Cale finally looked up, meeting the reptilian's skeptical gaze. "I wasn't fighting in an arena." A heavy pause followed. Some understood instantly. Others took a moment, their expressions shifting as realization dawned. Gladiators fought for sport, for glory. Their battles, while deadly, had structure, rules. But mercenaries, assassins, they killed to survive, for orders, for missions that never made it into history books. Cale leaned slightly forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Where I come from, we don't fight for cheers. We fight for wars that don't end." Gruck exhaled through his nostrils. "You're a soldier." Cale neither confirmed nor denied it. But his silence spoke volumes. The insectoid warrior took a cautious step back, something akin to fear creeping into his many eyes. "What kind of wars give a man thousands of kills?" Cale didn't answer. Instead, he let the question hang in the air. And that was somehow worse than any response he could have given. Word of Cale's kill count spread like wildfire. Within minutes, the once rowdy gladiators in the barracks had fallen silent. Conversations became hushed, glances wary. Even those who had boasted of their own bloody histories seemed reluctant to compare them to his. But it wasn't just the gladiators. Staff, engineers, medics, even the arena guards started looking at him differently. The playful mockery they initially showed him vanished, replaced by something more cautious, fear. The numbers didn't lie. Cale had slaughtered more beings than entire platoons of gladiators combined. He wasn't just another warrior seeking fame. He was a predator, something far worse than any of them had anticipated. The arena champion, a massive creature with bioluminescent scales, entered the barracks. Unlike the others, he showed no hesitation, striding confidently towards Kale. The other gladiators instinctively stepped aside, giving him space. "Human," the champion rumbled, his voice deep, resonant like rolling thunder. "I have fought for 200 years. I have killed thousands. But I have never seen a warrior like you." Kale glanced up at him, unimpressed. "Is that supposed to mean something?" The champion studied him, his golden eyes narrowing. "It means I want to know, do you fight for glory, or do you fight because you have nothing else?" Kale's expression remained unreadable, but the slight clench of his jaw was answer enough. The champion exhaled, stepping back. "Then you are the most dangerous thing this arena has ever seen." Around them, other gladiators exchanged glances. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked unsettled. For the first time in the arena's history, it wasn't the reigning champion who was feared the most, but the quiet human who had barely broken a sweat. Arena management had a problem, and they knew it. The Galactic Gladiator Arena thrived on spectacle, on bloody battles, dramatic victories, and the rise and fall of champions. That's what kept audiences coming back for more. Gladiators were meant to struggle, to claw their way up the ranks, losing limbs and lives along the way. Cale Vance had broken that system in one night. A fighter like him wasn't just dangerous, he was boring. There was no struggle, no dramatic comebacks. He walked into the ring, dismantled his opponents in seconds, and walked out without so much as a scratch. The audience might have been stunned into silence at first, but now they were growing restless. They hadn't come to see a massacre. They had come to see a fight. And so, arena management made a decision. If Kale couldn't be beaten fairly, they would ensure he was beaten unfairly. His next match was against a creature twice his size, its body enhanced with experimental combat serums. It was faster, stronger, and nearly impervious to pain. They had also tampered with Kale's weapons, dulling the edges of his blades and overloading his energy pistol so it would malfunction after one shot. The fight lasted 13 seconds. Kale dodged the initial charge, stepped inside the beast's swing, and shoved his malfunctioning pistol straight down its throat before pulling the trigger. The weapon overheated instantly, but that was exactly what he had counted on. The blast detonated inside the creature's skull, killing it instantly. Kale walked away without looking back. For the next match, they poisoned his food. Not enough to kill him, just enough to weaken him, to slow him down. They hadn't accounted for the fact that as a soldier, Kale had spent years building an immunity to a wide range of toxins. He felt the effects, sure, but not enough to matter. He still won the match. After that, they rigged the battlefield itself, planting explosive traps beneath the sand. Kale noticed the disturbed ground patterns within seconds and lured his opponent onto the mines instead. One by one, every dirty trick they tried failed. And each time, Kale adapted. By the end of the week, he had stopped acknowledging the sabotage entirely. It was just another obstacle, like bad weather or a lack of ammunition on a mission. Arena management was running out of options, but they weren't the only ones paying attention. The Galactic Champions, the legends of the arena, the undefeated warriors whose names were etched in history, had been watching Kale's rise with growing interest. For some, it was curiosity. For others, it was concern. One champion, a towering warlord named Zorak, had seen hundreds of fighters come and go. He had fought and killed the best of them. And yet as he observed Kale from afar, he felt something new, unease. He had seen killers before, but Kale wasn't just a killer. He was something else. Determined to understand the threat, Zorak decided to test him. Not in combat, but in the only way he knew how. Zorak was a telepath, a rare gift among his species. With a single touch, he could read minds, uncover memories, and glimpse into the darkest corners of a being's soul. And so, Under the guise of congratulating Kale on his latest victory, Zorak extended a hand. Kale hesitated only for a moment before shaking it. The moment their hands met, Zorak's mind was flooded with images. Not of arena battles, not of staged fights for entertainment, but of war. Real war. Explosions ripping through city streets. The screams of soldiers and civilians alike. The unrelenting rhythm of gunfire in the dead of night. Blood pooling in the sand. A young Cale Vance, rifle in hand, standing amidst bodies. Not as a conqueror, not as a hero, but as a survivor. Zorak stumbled back, breathless. His hands trembled as he looked at Kale. Kale merely raised an eyebrow. That was rude. Zorak was speechless. He had expected arrogance, pride, even cruelty. But all he had seen in Kale's mind was efficiency. Cold, calculated efficiency. No anger, no joy. Just a simple, practiced act of killing. And that terrified him more than anything. Kale was used to fighting strong opponents. He had fought alien mercenaries, genetically modified super soldiers, and entire enemy factions in his past life. The arena's best warriors weren't much different. Stronger perhaps, but predictable. Except for one, the Butcher of Vyre. The name was whispered with a mix of reverence and fear. A warrior who had never been defeated, a legend among gladiators, said to have killed his own warlord in single combat before being captured and forced into the arena. Unlike the others, he had never fought for glory. He fought because it was the only thing he knew how to do. When Kale stepped into the ring and saw the Butcher waiting for him, he knew instantly that this would be different. The Butcher was tall, his armor battered from years of battle, his stance relaxed but balanced. He did not roar, did not posture. He simply studied Kale, the way a predator studies another predator. Then he spoke. "You are the first fighter I've met who does not fight for sport." Kale said nothing. The Butcher nodded, as if he understood. Then, without warning, he attacked. For the first time since arriving in the arena, Kale was forced onto the defensive. The Butcher was fast, not just physically but mentally. He adjusted mid-strike, adapting to Kale's movements, anticipating his counters. It was like fighting a mirror image of himself. Blow after blow, the two exchanged strikes, neither gaining the upper hand. The crowd, usually roaring with excitement, had fallen into stunned silence. This wasn't a gladiator fight. This was war. Kale finally managed to land a solid hit, driving his knee into the Butcher's ribs. The Butcher staggered back, but instead of anger, he smiled. "You are worthy," he said. Then he charged again, and Kale smiled back. The audience had been watching gladiator battles for years, but they had never seen anything like this. The fight between Kale and the Butcher of Vyre had stripped away the spectacle, the theatrics, the rehearsed brutality meant for entertainment. What they were witnessing now was something raw, something real. Blades flashed, bodies moved with terrifying precision, and every strike carried the weight of warriors who had spent their lives perfecting the art of survival. There were no wasted movements, no unnecessary flourishes. Just cold, efficient violence. For the first time in the history of the arena, the spectators weren't cheering. They were holding their breath. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the Butcher faltered. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone untrained to see it. His stance wavered for half a second. Kale saw it, and in that half second, he struck. A feint to the left, a brutal knee to the solar plexus, and a final bone-crushing strike to the side of the Butcher's head. The legendary warrior collapsed to his knees, gasping. Kale stepped back, waiting. The Butcher exhaled, then looked up, meeting Kale's eyes. "You win," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Kale extended a hand. The Butcher took it. The arena exploded into chaos. The crowd's reaction wasn't what arena management had expected. There was no disappointment, no calls for blood. Instead, they were chanting Kale's name. The human who had been dismissed as weak, the fighter they had rigged fights against, the soldier who had taken down their greatest warrior. The people loved him. That was a problem. The entire gladiator system thrived on its champions, its heroes and villains carefully curated to keep audiences engaged. Fighters rose through the ranks, but they did so in a way that was controlled, predictable. No one was supposed to break the system. Kel hadn't just broken it, he had shattered it. In the control room, the arena overseers were scrambling. "This is getting out of hand," one muttered. Another growled. "If we don't stop him now, we'll lose control of the entire show." The reptilian supervisor from before narrowed his eyes. "Then maybe it's time we remind the audience who's really in charge." Cale had suspected something was amiss when the guards escorted him out of the barracks and deeper into the facility. They didn't take him to the usual medical wing or prep chambers. They took him somewhere else, somewhere quieter. A reinforced steel door slid open, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with containment pods. Inside, warriors lay unconscious, suspended in stasis. Cale frowned. "What is this?" The reptilian overseer stepped forward, a smug grin on his face. "This," he said, gesturing to the prisoners, "is the real arena." Cale's gaze hardened. The overseer continued. "Did you really think this was just about combat, about warriors proving themselves in fair fights, human? No. The arena is a business. We control the outcomes. We decide who wins, who loses, and when fighters stop being profitable, they disappear." Cale glanced at the pods again. Some of the faces inside were familiar. Fighters who had supposedly died in the arena, their deaths mourned or celebrated by the crowd. They hadn't died. They had been taken. His jaw clenched. "Why?" The overseer chuckled. "The same reason anyone does anything. Money. Betting on gladiator fights is one thing, but controlling those bets, ensuring the outcomes, that's where the real power is." Cale was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice colder than the steel walls around them, he said, "You've made a mistake." The overseer arched an eyebrow. "Oh." Cale met his gaze. "You should have just killed me before." Before the overseer could react, Cale moved. One guard went down instantly, his throat crushed. Another reached for his weapon, but Cale was already there, twisting the gun out of his hands and firing a single precise shot into the overseer's knee. The reptilian screamed, collapsing. Cale grabbed him by the collar, yanked him close. "You're going to tell me how to shut this whole thing down." The overseer, now gasping in pain, spat blood. "You think you can stop this? This is bigger than you." Cale smiled. "Good." He slammed the overseer's head against the control panel, triggering an alarm. And just like that, the breakout began. It started with the containment pods. As the system malfunctioned, the warriors inside began to awaken. Some were disoriented, but others knew exactly what had happened to them, and they were angry. Guards flooded the chamber, weapons drawn, but they weren't ready for what came next. Cale moved like a ghost through the chaos, taking out soldiers with brutal efficiency. The freed gladiators, now realizing the truth, turned their rage on the overseers, tearing through their former captors. Elsewhere in the arena, riots erupted. The audience, now aware of the uproar behind the matches, turned violent. Some tried to flee, others stormed the VIP sections, attacking the wealthy elites who had controlled their entertainment for years. The arena was collapsing. Cale didn't stop. He led the fighters through the facility, taking down security forces, overriding lockdown protocols, and ensuring that no one who had profited from the system escaped unscathed. By the time the sun rose over the smoldering ruins of the once great galactic gladiator arena, the entire galaxy had already heard the news. The system had fallen, and at the center of it all was a human. The arena was in ruins. Smoke curled into the air. The once mighty Colosseum was now little more than a battlefield littered with wreckage and bodies. The uprising had torn through the ranks of the overseers, their empire crumbling in a single night of blood and fire. Fighters once shackled by a corrupt system were now free. Some fled, seeking new lives beyond the arena's reach. Others stayed, watching as the dust settled, waiting to see what came next. Kale stood in the center of it all, breathing steadily. His hands were stained with blood, not all of it alien. His muscles ached, but his mind was clear. He had done what needed to be done. But the arena's masters weren't finished yet. A deep mechanical hum filled the air. The ground beneath him vibrated. From the ruins of the main control tower, something massive stirred. A final contingency plan. The Colosseum's ultimate weapon. The war machine emerged. It was something ancient, something built in the days when gladiators weren't just fighters, but instruments of destruction. Towering over the battlefield, its body was a fusion of alien technology and raw brutality. Blades jutted from its arms, energy cannons hummed along its shoulders, and its single cyclopean eye locked onto Kale with inhuman precision. The crowd, what was left of it, fell silent. Even the victorious rebel warriors, hardened by years of battle, took a step back. Kale sighed. Of course they had a backup plan. The war machine moved first. A plasma blast ripped through the ground where Kale had been standing moments before. He rolled, dodging effortlessly, scanning for weaknesses. It was heavily armored. Standard weapons wouldn't work. He needed something bigger. His eyes flicked to the wreckage of an old energy turret, half buried in debris. It was risky, but he had no time to hesitate. He sprinted, dodging another blast, feeling the heat singe the air around him. The war machine adjusted, anticipating his movement. A blade the size of a small vehicle slashed towards him. Kale slid beneath it, grabbing a discarded explosive charge from a fallen guard as he went. One shot. He vaulted onto the turret's remains, using the last functional piece of its targeting system to lock onto the war machine's central core. He threw the explosive. Fired. The shot struck the explosive midair, igniting it just as it hit the machine's core. A blinding explosion tore through the battlefield. The war machine staggered, its systems overloading, sparks flying from its joints. Kale didn't wait. He ran straight towards it. With a final leap, he climbed onto its damaged frame, ripped open an exposed panel, and emptied an entire plasma clip into its neural interface. The machine convulsed. Then with a deafening roar, it collapsed. The silence that followed was almost eerie. Then a single voice called out, "He did it!" And then another, and another. The cheers spread, growing louder, filling the ruins of the arena with a sound that wasn't of war or violence, but of victory. Kale stepped away from the wreckage, exhaling slowly. It was over, but he wasn't staying. He turned, slipping through the chaos while the others were still celebrating. He had no interest in ruling the ruins of the arena, no desire to become a symbol or a leader. The galaxy would remember his name, but he had no intention of letting it find him again. By the time the celebrations died down and the fighters looked for him, Kale was gone. The legend spread fast. Stories traveled from one planet to the next, growing wilder with each retelling. Some said Kale had single-handedly destroyed the entire gladiator empire. Others claimed he had taken down the war machine with nothing but his bare hands. The truth was already becoming myth. In the underworld, mercenaries whispered his name with reverence. In the halls of power, politicians worried about what he represented. A human, an unknown variable, someone who had proven that even the most rigid systems could be shattered. And in the darker corners of the galaxy, there were those who saw him not as a hero, but as a problem. A human with a kill count too high to calculate. A soldier who had walked into the most brutal arena in existence and left undefeated. That kind of power made people nervous. Bounties were placed, inquiries were made, but no one could find him. Some said he had retired to a distant world, living in solitude. Others claimed he was still fighting, taking contracts in places too remote to track. One thing was certain. No one would ever underestimate a human again.